Prologue. Hayden Burgess, an ex-military officer turned entrepreneur, operates from her high-tech Johannesburg office at Mamawata Incorporated, a company she controls with precision. Her petition to the U.S. Supreme Court has been denied, forcing her case back to the military courts. Her attorney suggests appealing to President Brandon Stokes, but she dismisses the idea. Stokes, now ousted, is only concerned with saving himself. Disillusioned with both the legal system and public inaction, she decides to take matters into her own hands. Using her encrypted network, she issues a series of covert orders, monitoring classified data and deploying a mysterious operation called Takar Exploit T10. Hayden, once betrayed by the system, has meticulously built a network of operatives to exact her own version of justice. Her mission is clear: take down those who wronged her and countless others, by force if necessary. War is coming. In Chapter 1, Avery Keene sits before a congressional hearing, facing scrutiny over her role in uncovering President Brandon Stokes' crimes. It has been 4 months since Stokes was removed from office, and Congress is now debating impeachment. The scandal stems from evidence Avery unearthed, revealing genocide, treason, and murder linked to Stokes and his administration. Avery's legal team, led by Patrick Guarashi, defends her as opposing lawmakers, particularly Representative Luke Boylan, attempt to derail proceedings. Boylan storms out after being denied entry, seeking to leverage the hearings for political gain. Chairman Max Feinberg formally opens the session, emphasizing the White House's repeated obstruction and noting that key figures, including Major Will Vance, have disappeared. Representative Daphne Fairchild warns Avery that while they seek to expose Stokes' crimes, her own conduct will also be investigated. The stakes are higher than ever. In Chapter 2, Avery endures 5 hours of congressional questioning about her role in exposing President Stokes' crimes. The hearing takes a sharp turn when Representative Joe Hibner accuses her of having a past romantic relationship with Kareem Shabazz, a casino pit boss and videographer, claiming she used doctored videos to blackmail Indira Srinivasan and Nigel Cooper. Avery firmly denies knowing Shabazz, but Chairman Feinberg suspends the hearing to investigate the claim. Behind closed doors, Feinberg and Avery's legal team discuss the strategy. They suspect the accusations are a smear campaign to discredit her and weaken the impeachment case against Stokes. Later, at home, Avery receives a cryptic call from Major Will Vance, warning that a cyber attack targeting the federal court system is imminent. Though she distrusts him, he urges her to stay vigilant, suggesting America is at risk. Avery refuses to cooperate, but the warning lingers. In Chapter 3, President Brandon Stokes strategizes with his legal team, which specializes in crimes ranging from perjury to genocide, as he fights impeachment and removal from office. His attorneys inform him that the inquiry hit a snag when Avery Keene was accused of fabricating evidence, prompting the committee to suspend hearings. Stokes, still the Republican frontrunner, demands a plan to regain the White House and replace Vice President Schlossberg, who invoked the 25th Amendment against him. Meanwhile, Speaker of the House DuBose Porter meets with Chairman Max Feinberg, who dismisses the Jamaica scandal as a distraction, but fears the public won't want to believe the truth about Stokes. Porter orders the impeachment inquiry to conclude within a week, ensuring a vote before Election Day. He warns Feinberg that every move is political, pushing for a swift October surprise to secure Stokes' removal and solidify Democratic control. In Chapter 4, Judge Francesca Whitner faces a blackmail scheme after a video surfaces showing her making racist and offensive remarks. Despite her vehement denials, her career clerk, Preston Davies, knows the video is fabricated but is aware of her past mistakes, including a DWI that could unravel her career. She has been involved in a deal with AUSA Jason Johnson, accepting bribes for judicial favors. Despite her guilt, she is forced to comply with the blackmailer's demands. In court, she acquits a defendant, Thad Colgate, under pressure, even though the evidence suggests his guilt. Days later, Colgate commits a massacre at his former workplace, including children, and Whitner blames herself for enabling his release. She continues to follow the blackmailer's instructions, unable to escape their control. Despite her remorse, she's drawn deeper into their web of manipulation. In Chapter 5, Avery Keene attends a conference feeling isolated due to her controversial reputation following the impeachment of President Brandon Stokes. While at the event, she receives cryptic text messages from an anonymous sender, eventually solving a series of puzzles referencing key Supreme Court cases in foreign policy. She meets Preston Davies, a federal judge's clerk, who reveals troubling information about his former boss, Judge Francesca Whitner. Davies shows Avery a fake video that blackmailed Whitner into releasing Thad Colgate, a dangerous criminal who later committed a mass shooting. He claims Whitner was coerced into her actions by powerful individuals using blackmail. Preston provides Avery with a file containing a list of Foreign Intelligence Surveillance Court, or FSC, judges, revealing that Whitner was one of them. Avery realizes the gravity of the situation and is thrust into a complex conspiracy involving national security. In Chapter 6, Avery Keene is frustrated as she searches for Preston Davies, who has mysteriously disappeared after giving her a phone and revealing information about Judge Whitner. She is confronted by an aggressive woman at the hotel who insults her, but Avery diffuses the situation to avoid attracting media attention. After a tense chase, Avery witnesses a shooting targeting Preston in a taxi, resulting in his death. He was likely silenced to prevent him from revealing crucial information. Avery, shaken, takes Preston's phone, fearing its geolocation data could expose her involvement. She places the phone in a Faraday case to block its signal. Meanwhile, a female assassin who tracked Preston's movements disposes of her disguise after the killing and reports back to her superior, Hayden Burgess. The assassin is instructed to keep an eye on Avery, recognizing her connection to the plot, but not acting unless necessary. In Chapter 7, Avery Keene arrives at Jared's townhouse where they share a quiet evening. She explains to him the details of the shooting she witnessed involving Preston Davies, a clerk who had given her important documents about Judge Whitner. Preston's involvement in a conspiracy and the blackmail of the judge eventually led to his murder. Avery reveals the documents and a burner phone he gave her, which contains disturbing information. Jared helps her analyze the phone, finding a video of Thad Colgate, a man released by Whitner, committing a workplace massacre. Avery speculates that the phone might have been a tool for blackmail. Jared discovers malware embedded in the phone's source code, indicating it was a sophisticated time bomb. Despite the risks, Avery decides to wait for Jared's friends to help decode the malware before taking everything to Agent Lee. She's determined but cautious about revealing too much. In Chapter 8, Avery visits her mother, Rita, who is in rehab after 4 months of sobriety. Avery is cautious but hopeful about Rita's recovery. At the facility, they talk about Avery's current struggles, including her challenges with finding work after the impeachment and her frustration with the system. Later, as Avery heads home, she notices a suspicious silver Mercedes that seems to be following her. Despite trying to remain calm, her paranoia grows when the car is still present near her apartment. After ensuring she is safe inside, Avery reviews her surveillance system and sees the car driving away. Fearing for her safety, she calls Agent Robert Lee to arrange a meeting the next morning, realizing the situation with Preston Davies and the conspiracy is far from over. In Chapter 9, Avery meets with Agent Robert Lee at the FBI headquarters to discuss the murder of Preston Davies and cab driver Anatol Petska, linking it to Judge Whitner and a burner phone. Lee reveals that the gun used in the killings matches the weapon of a notorious Mossad assassin, Nix, and suggests that Avery may be targeted. They discuss the involvement of the Foreign Intelligence Surveillance Court, FISA, and a deepfake video related to the case. Avery shares her concerns about a silver Mercedes that she noticed following her, and Lee assigns a car to watch her. Meanwhile, the hacktivist group Bonsai, led by Hayden Burgess, has completed a series of cyber attacks and dispersed with a large sum of Bitcoin. Leon Adams, a skilled hacker in the group, is offered $10 million to create malicious code for a new mission, which he accepts, marking the beginning of a new phase in their plan. In Chapter 10, Judge Michael Oliver reflects on his past actions, particularly his involvement in a corrupt deal to help his granddaughter, Nivea, get into Blair College. A year ago, he delayed a ruling in a case to help a wealthy classmate, Quentin Forster, avoid discovery, which led to a series of blackmail attempts. Recently, Oliver received threatening messages and recordings, including one of a violent murder, demanding he take action on a specific email to be sent on Monday. The blackmailer implies harm to his family if he refuses, using the phrase "patriot's duty," echoing his grandson Malcolm's earlier words. Overwhelmed with guilt and fear for his family, Oliver contemplates following through with the blackmailer's demands. He decides to comply with their instructions, realizing he is being watched, and prepares for the consequences of his choices. In Chapter 11, the political drama intensifies. Scott Curley of Politics Now reports on the impeachment of President Stokes and the controversy surrounding the 25th Amendment. Secretary of Housing and Urban Development, Dr. Carlos Espinoza, faces scrutiny for potentially revoking his support for the amendment, which has kept Stokes out of the Oval Office. The impeachment process is heating up as Washington waits to see if Stokes will regain power. Meanwhile, Hayden Burgess, orchestrating covert operations, monitors global activities. Her team confirms the successful disbanding of the hacking group Bonsai and the readiness of 97 locations for deployment. As Hayden assesses the situation, she is concerned about Avery Keene. Despite Keene's recent connections to Preston Davies, who is now dead, Hayden sees her as both an asset and a potential liability. Surveillance on Keene continues as Hayden strategizes to keep her in play while remaining prepared to act if necessary. In Chapter 12, Chief Justice Teresa Roseborough and Justice Murtha Estrada discuss the implications of the 25th Amendment's use in President Stokes' impeachment and the potential abuse of power. Murtha suggests that the court should intervene, especially given the potential for misuse in the future. She also brings up concerns about the reputation of the court, particularly in light of Avery Keene's involvement in recent events. Avery, visibly stressed, meets with the Chief Justice, revealing details about the murder of Preston Davies, the deepfake video, and the disappearance of Judge Whitner's social media. The Chief addresses concerns over Avery's role and suggests she take a leave of absence. Avery resists the idea of surveillance and a bodyguard. The Chief then assigns her a research task on cybersecurity vulnerabilities in the judiciary to keep her occupied while distancing her from the ongoing investigations, ensuring her continued role as a law clerk. In Chapter 13, Judge Michael Oliver, duty judge for the week at the Foreign Intelligence Surveillance Court, reflects on his past mistakes and the consequences of a decision made to help his daughter get into Blair College. He is coerced by a mysterious entity to activate Bluetooth on his phone, leading to the compromise of the court system. Meanwhile, Avery Keene, disguised as a tourist, meets Agent Lee at the FBI building to deliver the devices containing critical information about the assassination of Preston Davies and the involvement of an international assassin, Nix. The FBI, including Europol and other agencies, reviews the data, discussing the implications of FISA warrants and the assassination. Despite Avery's attempt to assist, Agent Gale insists on limiting her involvement, suggesting a search of her personal property. Avery refuses, asserting her legal rights, and tensions rise as Agent Lee supports her decision. The investigation is officially transferred to the NCIJTF. In Chapter 14, Agent Lee and Avery are confronted by Agent Gale, who warns them of the heightened tension within various federal agencies over the Preston Davies case. Gale reveals that multiple agencies are behind in their knowledge of the case, and there are concerns about a major cyber attack. The discussion shifts to a corrupt federal prosecutor, Jason Johnson, who fabricated multiple FISA warrants, including those signed by Judge Whitner. Avery realizes that the compromised judge and prosecutor are involved in something nefarious, possibly linked to an imminent national security threat. Gale reveals that Johnson's case is critical, and she can't allow Avery to be directly involved anymore, but she still seeks Avery's insights. As they prepare to leave, a Secret Service agent, Eddie Morales, arrives, accusing Avery of being involved in money laundering and conspiracy. Avery agrees to go with Morales, leaving Agent Lee and Gale stunned by the new charges against her. In Chapter 15, Avery is escorted by Secret Service agents to President Stokes' secluded mansion. During the ride, she realizes she has been summoned by Stokes under dubious circumstances. Once inside, she faces the president, who engages her in a conversation filled with manipulation and deflection. He denies responsibility for the criminal actions attributed to him, including the Tigris Project, and tries to charm Avery into trusting him by invoking their shared ideals of service and freedom. Avery, however, is resolute, refusing his attempts to sway her with eloquent rhetoric. She recognizes the dangerous mix of charisma and zealotry in Stokes, solidifying her understanding that he is not merely a power-hungry politician, but a potentially dangerous man. As she leaves the meeting, Avery encounters Congressman Luke Boylan, adding to the suspicion and complexity of the political environment. In Chapter 16, Speaker DuBose Porter struggles with the impending impeachment of President Stokes, facing opposition and complications. Stokes is back in power due to a weak impeachment support from Republicans, and Porter needs a strategy to secure votes. Avery Keene is summoned to discuss the matter, but she remains firm in her stance, stating that her role in the impeachment is over. The Speaker and Majority Leader neighbors pressure her, asking her to use her influence to secure Justice Wynn's resignation, to sway public opinion, and raise the stakes in the election. However, Avery refuses to manipulate Wynn's position, arguing that the public cares more about their personal struggles than the workings of the Supreme Court. Ultimately, Porter and neighbors realize they need a more tangible strategy to win the election, with Porter hinting at a different, unspecified approach. In Chapter 17, Nix tracks Avery's movements, confirming she met with President Stokes despite their mutual animosity. Nix also discovers Congressman Luke Boylan's involvement, but notes no direct link to Stokes. Meanwhile, Avery immerses herself in researching cyber threats to the judiciary, following up on leads from Agent Gale. She receives a cryptic call from Major Vance, who provides a string of numbers, hinting at an impending attack during the election. Despite the vague intel, Avery sets to work analyzing the data. Later, Avery is informed by Carmen Patrick about a press conference where President Stokes calls for a retraction of Avery's statements, accusing her of betraying the nation. Additionally, Boylan releases confidential deposition recordings of Avery, implicating her and her friends in a conspiracy against Stokes. Avery realizes Boylan has doxed her associates, putting them in grave danger, and urgently needs to leave to protect them. In Chapter 18, Avery urgently prepares to leave her office after learning that Congressman Boylan has doxed her and her friends, amplifying the danger to them. She meets with Chief Justice Roseborough, who reassures her that security measures have been implemented. Avery details her recent experiences, including being detained by the Secret Service and meeting with President Stokes. The chief reveals that FBI Director Alford is already aware of the situation and is coordinating with law enforcement. Avery's friends, including Ling Yin, are being protected, and Agent Lee is overseeing their safety. Avery shares her concerns about the ongoing threats and the potential for a wider attack related to the impeachment. The chief agrees to keep her updated, and Avery is advised to remain in a safe house. Avery's growing unease about the risks to her family is discussed, and she decides to work from home. In Chapter 19, President Stokes furiously prepares for a challenging political fight. He orders daily security sweeps of the Oval Office and demands Vice President Schlossberg's presence. As tensions rise, Stokes plans to manipulate the situation with Avery Keene's testimony to his advantage. Congressman Luke Boylan arrives, discussing plans to further attack the impeachment process, including pushing for the Vice President's resignation. Stokes offers Boylan a promotion to Chief of Staff, asking him to leave his congressional seat behind to help lead the charge. Boylan agrees, recognizing the power dynamics at play. Meanwhile, Leon Adams plans to flee to Belize after completing his task. He recruits his cousin Corey to help launch a virus that will make them wealthy. Despite his assurances that no one important will be harmed, the virus is set to trigger significant events reflecting Leon's darker motivations. In Chapter 20, Avery arrives at Jared's home, where she is met by friends and FBI agents after a long and eventful day. She recounts the events, including meeting with President Stokes, being detained by the Secret Service, and being warned to retract her testimony about Tigris. Avery admits to being under house arrest, but with the FBI and Agent Lee's help, she feels relatively safe. She updates everyone on the ongoing investigation, including her role in identifying suspicious activities linked to the impeachment. Meanwhile, Nix observes Avery's home from a distance, noting the heightened security and preparing for a more calculated approach. With her surveillance on Avery and Jared, she strategizes her next move, keen on uncovering more about Avery's connection to the recent events. Tensions rise as both sides prepare for an impending confrontation. In Chapter 21, Avery gathers her friends, Jared, Ling, and Noah, to discuss the information she has uncovered. She details the mysterious numbers Davies sent her and the connections between various companies surveilled under warrants linked to Jason Johnson. Avery is trying to understand why these companies are under investigation, with clusters in industries like tech, finance, and energy. Despite not finding direct links, she's certain there's a larger scheme at play. Avery also mentions the involvement of Major Vance, who recently contacted her again, providing more cryptic clues. She's cautious about involving Agent Lee, as the information could jeopardize his position. As tensions rise, the group works together to analyze the data, trying to uncover a pattern. Meanwhile, Nix continues her surveillance, observing Jared's house and noting the presence of FBI agents. Hayden, reflecting on her troubled past, prepares for the next phase of her plan. In Chapter 22, Avery digs into the backgrounds of FISA judges, focusing on Judge Whitner's connections to Foster Energy, a company under surveillance. As she reviews the cases of other judges, she uncovers a potential pattern involving power-related companies and unusual rulings. After discovering that a case linked Foster Energy to a significant power outage, Avery suspects that something larger is at play, possibly involving foreign interests infiltrating the power grid. She connects various energy companies under surveillance, particularly in regions with critical connections to the US and Canada. Avery theorizes that orchestrating a continental blackout could cripple economies and cause widespread chaos. Meanwhile, Judge Michael Oliver faces a threat when an assailant confronts him about his phone, demanding he comply with instructions. He fears for his family's safety and is left shaken after being coerced into obedience, realizing the grave consequences of disobedience. In Chapter 23, Avery continues investigating the connections between FISA judges and energy companies. She analyzes a case involving Judge Alvin Lake, which links a Wisconsin company, Red Horse, to a power grid-related lawsuit. Avery notices a connection to MISO, an entity managing electricity distribution across the US and Canada, raising suspicions about the power grid. Despite warnings from Jared and the FBI, she contacts a friend, Baz O'Kuhn, at FERC to help her investigate further. Jared, Ling, and Noah each agree to research different parts of the puzzle, including Pacifica Protection, Quint Goodwin, and Foster Energy. Avery, increasingly focused, spends hours piecing together the data, believing she's on the verge of uncovering something bigger. As tensions rise, Avery prepares to meet Baz in the morning, hoping he can provide crucial information to link the dots between the judges and a potential cyber or power grid attack. In Chapter 24, Avery meets with her old friend Baz O'Kuhn, a lawyer at the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission, FERC, to discuss potential vulnerabilities in the U.S. power grid. Avery shares her concerns about a conspiracy to manipulate the energy system without physically attacking substations. She presents her findings, including a mass shooting in Idaho connected to a power company and a complex case involving power grid operators. Baz confirms that tampering with the grid is possible through cyber attacks, including uploading viruses or exploiting security gaps. Avery convinces Baz to help her discreetly, giving him a burner phone for future communication. Meanwhile, Nix tracks Avery's movements, noting her meeting with Baz and speculating about the information she could have uncovered. Avery's investigation leads her to suspect a plan to disrupt the power grid, and she prepares for a trip to West Virginia to dig deeper into the connections. In Chapter 25, Avery and Jared leave a medical appointment for his father, discussing their next steps. Avery shares her ongoing investigation into the power grid, revealing her plan to visit West Virginia with Agent Lee to inspect a suspicious power plant. They drive through rural areas while Avery explains her theory about a cyber attack targeting the grid, which could involve coordinated attacks on multiple control rooms. Agent Lee expresses skepticism about the feasibility of such an attack, but Avery insists on following the lead. In West Virginia, they find a power station with minimal security but significant surveillance. Avery, determined to investigate further, sneaks onto the property, leaving Agent Lee frustrated but unable to stop her. This chapter highlights Avery's drive to uncover the conspiracy, her reliance on gut instincts, and her tendency to act independently despite the risks. In Chapter 26, Avery sneaks into a building in West Virginia, believing it to be a power substation, only to discover it is a server farm. She documents the facility, suspecting it could play a crucial role in a cyber attack on the U.S. power grid. She explains to Agent Lee that the system's increasing interconnectedness makes it vulnerable to cyber attacks targeting multiple components simultaneously. Lee is skeptical but agrees with her theory, and they contact Special Agent Sarah Beth Gale, who confirms that the FBI already has a FISA warrant for the property. Gale agrees to review the situation and potentially send a team for a search. Meanwhile, Nix, monitoring Avery's progress, grows concerned that Avery is uncovering key parts of a larger plan and decides to act preemptively, ordering the destruction of the West Virginia server farm. In Chapter 27, Avery and Agent Lee meet with S.A. Gale to discuss the findings from their investigation. They learn that the server farm in West Virginia has been mysteriously destroyed overnight, reinforcing Avery's suspicions about a coordinated threat. Gale presents Avery's theory to the task force, which includes representatives from several agencies. Despite initial skepticism, some members acknowledge the possibility of an unknown threat actor targeting the U.S. power grid. Avery connects her findings to several court cases involving FISC judges, highlighting connections to power companies and security breaches. Although some agencies remain doubtful, others agree to assist with further investigation. Avery suggests tapping into dark web networks and mentions a contact, Major William Vance, who has connections to dangerous individuals that might help their search. This revelation causes unease among the agents, but Avery remains determined to find answers. In Chapter 28, Avery faces a confrontation with Agent Lee after revealing her communication with Major William Vance. Lee is furious, accusing her of withholding crucial information, but Avery defends her actions, explaining the context and her reasons for not sharing sooner. Despite the tension, Agent Gale advocates for using Vance's intelligence, believing it could help with their investigation into the power grid threat. They trace coordinates given by Vance, which lead to a nuclear power plant in South Dakota. While Lee refuses to accept Vance's help due to his past actions, Gale agrees to leverage the information. Avery contacts Vance again through an encrypted app, receiving cryptic responses about potential hacktivist activities and software suppliers in Tel Aviv, Seoul, and Johannesburg. As Avery analyzes the information, she plans to consult with Jared about the tech and reconciles with her growing guilt over Lee's departure. In Chapter 29, Assistant Secretary Peter Kellner meets with Darnell Strum from the Department of Energy about a troubling report involving Avery Keene. Kellner, with ambitions to climb politically, seeks to downplay Avery's claims about a conspiracy to attack the U.S. power grid. Meanwhile, Acting Chief of Staff Luke Boylan, facing mounting pressure from the media and the looming elections, discusses the potential threat posed by Avery's allegations. Kellner and Boylan agree to dismiss her as a distraction to avoid public panic. Elsewhere, Judge Michael Oliver, involved in a covert operation, wrestles with guilt and fear as he aids in the infiltration of the U.S. safety system. His complicity grows as he delays IT access to his computer, which is being manipulated by an external party. As the pressure mounts, he is warned by a mysterious voice to keep quiet for his safety, signaling that his involvement is far from over. In Chapter 30, Avery and her team investigate new leads after discovering a nuclear power plant in South Dakota and connections to cryptocurrency. They uncover ties between Foster Energy and multiple energy companies, suggesting vulnerabilities in the U.S. power grid which may be targeted for a cyber attack. Jared explains how cryptocurrency mining could drive the attack, using cheap energy sources like Foster Energy's interconnected infrastructure. The team theorizes that the attackers have multiple goals, including targeting both the power grid and the financial system, especially cryptocurrency. Avery links the sabotage to corrupt judges, including Judge Michael Oliver, who might be helping to manipulate energy and financial systems for personal gain. The team connects various incidents, including the Idaho massacre and the Red Horse case, to a coordinated plot to disrupt the grid. Avery concludes that the mastermind behind the scheme is someone hiding in plain sight, controlling the chaos for profit. In Chapter 31, Agent Lee and Sarah Beth Gill confront Avery about their strained relationship, with Lee apologizing for his earlier outburst. Gale reveals that former Congressman Luke Boylan, now Chief of Staff, is concerned about Avery's involvement in a potential power grid attack. Boylan is worried that Avery might know too much about the threat. Meanwhile, Jared continues to investigate companies linked to the attack, uncovering 3 key players: a South Korean firm involved in encryption, an Israeli company competing with NSO Group, and a secretive South African company, Mamiwata. The latter, led by former Navy Lieutenant Hayden Burgess, has a scrubbed online presence. Avery remembers a denied case involving Burgess, and further research reveals that her digital footprint has been erased using a bot. Avery decides to visit the court, suspecting that the key to the conspiracy lies in the case she reviewed but didn't investigate thoroughly. In Chapter 32, Avery, Agent Lee, and Agent Gale visit the U.S. Supreme Court to investigate Hayden Burgess. While Avery dives into Burgess's petition files, she uncovers a troubling personal history. Burgess, a Navy veteran, was assaulted, wronged by the military justice system, and then became a cyber warfare expert. Hayden, now leading a secretive firm, Mamawata, uses her skills to execute global cyber attacks, including targeting the US grid. Avery also learns that Burgess's digital footprint has been completely erased, adding to the mystery. Meanwhile, Agent Lee and Agent Gale work on their own tasks. Agent Lee plans to push the FBI's cyber division into action, while Gale works on scanning FISC intranet systems for any breaches. The team remains focused on uncovering Burgess's role in the conspiracy, with Hayden's imminent cyber attack on the U.S. grid set to launch within 48 hours, potentially crippling the nation's infrastructure. In Chapter 33, FBI Director Latiessa Alford faces pressure as she navigates a potential national crisis involving a cyber attack on the U.S. power grid. The FBI investigates Hayden Burgess, who is behind the cyber assault, with Avery Keene providing critical insight. As tensions rise, Director Alford discusses the scope of the threat with Attorney General Dobson and President Stokes, who is initially unaware of the danger. The AG stresses the urgency of mobilizing resources and contacts, including energy, commerce, and defense sectors, while ensuring not to cause panic. Avery, recovering from an attack by Nix, continues to focus on the larger threat and its connection to the cyber war being waged by Burgess. With the president's reluctant acknowledgement of the severity, the White House begins to take action, coordinating efforts to prevent the impending disaster, while Avery's investigation into Burgess deepens. In Chapter 34, Avery Keene meets Baz Okuni, a former law school friend and attorney at the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission, seeking information on power grid vulnerabilities. Baz is hesitant, fearing political fallout, but agrees to help. Avery presents evidence suggesting a coordinated cyber attack on the power grid, linked to a mass shooting in Idaho. The shooter, an engineer at Ketchum Power, spent hours at his workstation before the attack, possibly compromising security systems. Baz confirms that infiltrating the grid is possible through outdated infrastructure and reliance on digital communication. Convinced of a larger conspiracy, Avery gives Baz a burner phone for secure contact. Meanwhile, operatives tracking Avery inform their leader, Hayden, of her meeting and begin surveillance on Baz. Concerned about her movements, they monitor her as she heads to Bethesda Naval Hospital, where Justice Wynn is hospitalized, recognizing his potential as leverage in their ongoing operation. In Chapter 35, Avery, Agent Lee, and Agent Gale strategize in the West Wing while reports of 2 federal judges' deaths emerge, connected to Hayden Burgess. As the FBI investigates, energy companies refuse to cooperate with warnings about a cyber attack on the power grid. Meanwhile, President Stokes faces a national crisis and debates actions to prevent chaos without invoking panic, such as implementing rolling blackouts. The government struggles to gain compliance, while Burgess's plan progresses despite setbacks. Phase 1 of her attack, stealing $4.2 billion in cryptocurrency, is complete, and Phase 2 begins targeting further disruptions. Hayden, using her connections and infiltration of the federal system, monitors the situation and pushes forward with a multi-vector assault. Despite Avery's interference, Hayden's malware spreads across the grid, and she plans to exploit the ensuing chaos. The attack is set to weaken public trust in critical systems. In Chapter 36, Agent Gale and her team wait in the White House as they monitor the crisis unfolding, while Avery receives a call from Major Vance. He reveals that Hayden Burgess and her team have stolen over $4 billion through blockchain hacking and cryptocurrency theft, and that they are planning a more extensive attack. Avery, Agent Lee, and Gale present their findings to President Stokes and his cabinet, including Rear Admiral Donovan Casey. Avery explains that Burgess's attack on the power grid is a form of revenge for her mistreatment by the military, especially against Casey, who she blames for the loss of her career and dignity. The president and his team, including the DHS secretary and energy officials, begin strategizing how to handle the attack and its implications. Avery insists the power grid attack isn't the final goal, but part of a larger, more intricate plan. In Chapter 37, Phase 2 of the Marina assault begins. Targeting power grids across the U.S., multiple states experience outages, but the government responds with rolling blackouts to prevent a full collapse. The crisis is contained but reveals the depth of the hackers' infiltration, with malware attacking hardware, software, and personnel. Avery, Jared, Ling, and Noah discover that Hayden Burgess's motivations go beyond just chaos and revenge. She is saving her former Navy colleagues, Hugley and Boozer, who were wronged by Admiral Casey. Burgess orchestrates a prison break during the blackouts, highlighting her skills and ambitions. Avery realizes that Burgess has also stolen classified naval technology, including a project called Cyrano, connected to Jared's past work. The chapter ends with Avery and Agent Lee preparing for further action, knowing that Burgess's next move could have catastrophic consequences. In Chapter 38, Avery and Agent Lee discuss Hayden Burgess's motives, suspecting that her revenge extends to targeting President Stokes, who failed to protect her and promoted Admiral Casey, the man responsible for her downfall. As they drive to Charlottesville, they piece together Burgess's complex plans. Meanwhile, Nix infiltrates Admiral Casey's home, systematically eliminating his security and confronting him. She forces Casey to confess to his actions against Hayden, but he continues to deny the rape. In a final act of revenge, Nix castrates him, fulfilling Hayden's vengeance. Just as she completes her mission, Agent Lee arrives, forcing Nix's surrender. She drops her weapon and is arrested. Agent Lee cuffs her as reports of her actions spread and her device's light winks out, signaling the end of her task. In Chapter 39, Avery watches as Nix is led away in handcuffs, surrounded by law enforcement and ambulances. Admiral Casey, gravely wounded, is carried out on a stretcher, blood still seeping from his injuries. The death toll from Nix's rampage grows, with 5 bodies found. Avery reflects on Hayden's revenge, realizing the depth of her motives to humiliate and exact personal vengeance. Despite stopping the grid collapse, Avery feels Hayden has still triumphed. As the FBI secures the crime scene, Avery lies on Jared's shoulder, disillusioned, while he reassures her that they've won. Avery struggles with her role in the aftermath, conflicted by the toll the case has taken on her sense of justice. As they wait for Agent Lee to return, Avery realizes she has changed, unsure if the life she imagined still fits her. In Chapter 40, Tyler Boozer and Carolyn Hugley, former prisoners, reunite with their children in the Seychelles after being freed by Hayden Burgess. Hayden watches from the shadows, reflecting on her complex motivations, including her desire for revenge against Admiral Casey and President Stokes, who she believes wronged her. Meanwhile, in Washington, the Senate prepares for impeachment proceedings against President Stokes. The Senate Majority Leader receives a shocking video revealing a conversation between Stokes and Casey, implicating both in a cover-up of Casey's actions. The video is leaked, causing political turmoil. Avery, Jared, Noah, and Ling watch as the scandal unfolds, realizing Hayden's manipulation has far-reaching consequences. Despite the president's efforts to control the narrative, the damage is done. Avery learns that Hayden has donated over $1 billion to various organizations, including one tied to her mother, showing a surprising shift in her intentions.